Evening, everyone. Hi, everyone. I'm a little bit early, so we'll let people join. But if you do want to start posting any of your questions at any point, I can start having a little read of the worries and concerns and questions you have for your final exam. Oh, we are nearly there. I don't know if it's the same in your college, but this is the final exam. So they've really put us through the ringer, I think, as far as religious studies exams. So you've done so well to keep going. But tomorrow it will be all done. So if you want to start posting any questions that you've got, and I can start having a read. We've been in this together all the way, but we are nearly there. Yeah, no problem at all. Me and my pleasure. Final one. Final one. Well, final one for you guys. I have to do it all again next year. um, might as well have a little quick chat about ethics. Ethics was quite surprising, obviously. It doesn't feel like only a week ago since we had ethics, but situation ethics was predictable. I wasn't expecting utilitarianism and sex ethics. I didn't look into it again, but I'm sure the same question was asked last year. And then another one just on euthanasia, just like last year. That was a bit, I don't know what the word would be. It's not predictable because you don't expect them to use the same questions twice, but it just kind of seemed a little bit unfair. Obviously, they can always ask you any questions on anything they want, but it's always nice to be able to show that you've learned all the topics and all the array of topics. To be honest with you, any of you out there that didn't go over your meta-ethics and conscience, well, you didn't need them anyway. So yeah, the ethics, I thought could have been a bit better. So we'll see what DCT's like tomorrow. So let's have a quick look at some of. Yeah, no, I completely agree, Beth. And when you have your prom, you feel like that's kind of like your finish point. So then to come back and have to have another exam. Yep, thanks for your questions so far. Yes, Maddie, it does seem like OCR just thought, oh, can't really think of any new questions. We'll just give the ones from last year. Then we don't need any new mark schemes. It does feel a little bit like that. I know that OCR are not like that, but it does feel a little bit like that. Yeah, the Kant question was very specific, very specific. I mean, you could still bring in duty because it's still your duty to do the categorical imperative, but then doing categorical imperative and the decision making. So if you did link it to business as well, it was quite a tricky one. Was that question? Yeah, absolutely fine. That you brought in preference. That would not be a problem if you did bring preference into your utilitarianism and sex question. That's fine. Just one more minute and then we'll have a look for DCT. Do you think they'll repeat the DCT questions? If I see Bonhoeffer one more time in a second year exam, literally there is one question they can ask on Bonhoeffer now. They ask Bonhoeffer they're obsessed with Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer and Person of Jesus. I mean, I don't dislike those topics. I think Bonhoeffer and Person of Jesus are great topics. I would much rather do a Bonhoeffer discipleship than a Saint Augustine pessimistic optimistic question. But it does get to a point where you're kind of like test me on a variety of topics, not just the same topics year in year out. But we'll see. Right, let's get going then. So, how big an issue is it to refer to a scholar without utilising their first name, call them by their second name, other than William James, where his second name's a first name? You always talk about them in their second name anyway. You don't need to remember their first name. I rarely I rarely would call him Jeremy Bentham. It would just be Bentham, just Mill. So for any variations for this exam, just call them in their second name. Rayner, for example. You don't need first names. That's not a problem. Compare Augustine Bonhoeffer? No, definitely not. On the predictions, is the first or second slide? The first slide is the ones that I think are the more obvious questions, but the second slide is the possibilities, as in the first slide has 3 second year topics and only 1 first year. I don't know whether we do that or not. So it's just to give you an array and an understanding of the sorts of questions they might ask. So it could be a selection of the first and the second slide. I might be completely wrong with my predictions. Again, with my predictions, all I've done is emphasize the gaps that they've never asked before. But as we've already known from ethics, they could just ask exactly the same question again. So we really don't know as far as predictions. I think pluralism's going to be on there somewhere. Pluralism society, pluralism theology. Yeah, I do. And liberation theology, there's so many areas of liberation theology. They've only asked 1 liberation theology question, even though it might have been on last year. I can't quite remember. Again, look to the PowerPoint that has the specific years on it. But liberation just never seems to be asked a lot for that one. And I know students find that quite challenging. So it's a good one to get your teeth stuck into. The predictions are just on the PowerPoint on YouTube. It's the same PowerPoint that's been for the other 2 exams as well. How many quotes, Bible quotes, should you put in? Um, as many or as few as you can remember. Even just 1 quote is brilliant. If you can't remember the direct quotes, paraphrase them. So if you just remember that it's in Matthew and it goes along these lines, that's absolutely fine. Only use quotation marks though when you know it's an exact quote. Otherwise, just paraphrase, because the examiner will recognize it still as text. So you don't have to remember quotes word for word. But don't forget as well, even just a quote of 2 to 3 words can still be a quote. So you don't have to have massive long quotes. But you will not be knocked down if you don't use quotes, but it's good for that extended understanding, deeper knowledge, etc. Can you bring natural to liberation theology? Absolutely. In this exam, this is what I've been really emphasizing with my students this week. In this exam, bring everything in the kitchen sink in. For DCT, just go crazy. Don't go too crazy though, don't go off the question. But for this one, bring in all the synoptic links. So I know a few of you have been asking me about situation ethics for moral principles. So moral principles does mention agape. Bring in Joseph Fletcher, bring in the inspirations from Jesus. In person of Jesus, link it to Bonhoeffer, link it to liberation theology, bring in natural law, bring in, you know, John Stuart Mill's approach to happiness and the golden rule. I'd bring in anything you want to, from bring in religious experiences, bring in William James, bring in Freud, bring in Feuerbach. If you see a connection and a link, run with it. You really have so much freedom in this exam as long as you answer the specific question and you have a clear line of argument. Make sure as well with this one, this is the hardest one I think to get an argument in. This is the hardest one to actually have an argument. So make sure you use lots of critical words. Really try and emphasize and think about, does it work, not work? Is it convincing, not convincing? So that's where you get your marks. But for this one, don't worry about getting loads of content. Just have a really good discussion to do with the question. Usually they ask a selection of both year 1, year 2. Again, with this one, it's really hard to know because there's 6 and 6. There's 6 first year and 6 second year. They're going to definitely ask you questions from both though, because there would be so many complaints from teachers to say, why have we taught all of this content and you've not even asked them a question on it? So there will be an array from both years. I really hope. Yep. So all the questions about mixing things, definitely you can mix your topics because it's all synoptic links. So as long as if you do mix any topics up, you just make it clear how it's relevant to what you're trying to argue. Right, that's a really good question. If they mention a text in the question, you have to know your two main texts. You need to make sure you read over them tonight or tomorrow morning. The Redemptoris Missio and, oh, I always get a brain, Malaris Dignitatum. You need to know at least these. Ephesians was asked specifically a few years ago, so I don't think you'll get a specific one again on Ephesians, even though it's very good to know your Ephesians. That's the man is the head of the household, head of the wife, love your wife, etc. That one. But you need to know your two main texts. They might put it in a question. If they do, you need to have a vein throughout your essay. So even if you bring in other paragraphs, you're talking about, I don't know, something to do with gender and theology, or bringing in Mary Daly, but it's asked you to talk about the Malaris Dignitatum, you need at least a little bit to show that you're bringing it in. Because if it's in the question, it means that they don't just want one paragraph, they do want you to have a spattering, even if it's a very short or small link. So, yes, just like any question, you need to answer the question throughout. If they mention a specific part, you have to mention it throughout, even if it's just a mention. They could repeat questions again. Who knows what they're going to do? I hope not, but they could. I very much doubt they would use a specific line of either of the texts in the question. Normally, if they put a specific line like they did for Ephesians, but that was actually to help students, so that if any student hadn't actually read Ephesians or remembered Ephesians, they could still talk about what it was. So they might be specific, bring a small part of the Redemptoris Missio into the question. I doubt it though, but if they're doing that, it's to actually help you for any students that are just forget what it is or something like that. Jesus, potentially, sorry, Hare's doing a heat thing. The only area they've never asked for Jesus is divine versus human nature. They could again ask political liberator again, but divine and human, that has never been asked before, or not specifically together. So it's mentioned quite a few times on the spec, and they've not really honed in on that area. Then you could talk about miracles and things like that. Yeah, so they could use a quote in the question. Yes, potentially. Um, I doubt it though. I think they'll just mention a text. They won't necessarily give you a quote from the text. Eloise, if a gender and society question asks if Christian gender roles are being undermined, does that just mean are they no longer relevant? Yes, you could discuss that. So if they've been undermined, does it mean that they're losing their core of Christianity? Does it mean they're no longer relevant? Basically, are they wavering? Is it difficult for them to have these Christian views in today's society? Are they being undermined? Undermined is another word for questioned. Are they being questioned as to whether they are relevant or not today, as you've said? So, what is their place within society? That's what that's questions asking. Thank you for that one. Yes, I like that argument, Emma. The idea that I am the son of God, he never really used that because he could have been killed a lot earlier for blasphemy. Yeah. So it might have been rather than maybe he knew inside he was the son of God, but that's why he never proclaimed it outwardly. Or maybe he did proclaim it outwardly, but the writers of the Bible didn't want to write it down because again he could have been killed earlier, because at the end of the day we don't actually know what Jesus said. We have no idea. We only know what Matthew thinks Jesus said or what John says that Jesus said. Don't forget, everything we've got is secondhand. We haven't got an actual book from Jesus. We haven't got, there is no part of the Bible that's actually written by Jesus. So it's quite interesting that we've always got it secondhand. So again, is that a reliable source, having it secondhand? We never really questioned Plato, who did it for Socrates, but it does mean that they could have edited it for things like that, for to maybe to protect Jesus. So yeah, it's an interesting perspective. A male savior save women. Right. So with that one, it's the idea that the Jesus that was predicted was a male warrior. So the Jesus that they were expecting to have was this warrior king, this liberator, this freer from the constraints of society. And what they actually got was Jesus. Jesus was the servant king. So it's the idea that, can a warrior save women? It's the idea that Jesus wasn't that man. So actually, the way that Jesus was as a servant king, a man that tried to help people and then died on the cross to save us all or save our sins, was that actually more liberating for women? So don't forget as well, if you do get a gender and society or gender and theology question, keep it controlled. There's so much you can talk about. Don't drown in content. Make sure you just have a really good discussion. But at the end of the day, always prepare yourself as well that you don't know who your markers are. So your marker could be a Catholic priest, for example. So you have to be articulate in your evaluation, but don't be offensive. Not that any of you would be, but it's quite hard not to get into a let's bash Christianity. And so you've always got to remember that whilst you can have a strong line of argument against Christianity, you have to be fair. So, for example, Mary Daly is very harsh in what she says. But actually, is it fair what she says? She brings in arguments that have nothing to do with Christianity. She takes parts of the Bible out of context to use, she drops bombs and then leaves them, but she doesn't look at things in context. So you can question everything. Do not accept anything in any topic, question everything, and that's what will get you the marks. There is so much to know, Clara. I completely agree. There's a lot of content, which is why I'm saying if you can't remember specifically in that topic, but you think, oh, I could bring in that and I could bring in that, go for it. Strengths and weaknesses, yeah. Sheep and the goats is final judgment, yes. They could ask a gender theology and a gender society question, fine. They could ask Christianity is sexist, and then they could say, compare Ruther and Daly. That's an awful question, by the way. I don't think they'll ask a compare Ruther and Daly. If they did, you have to pick just, I would say, 2 themes from each woman and use them against each other. So if they asked you a compare Ruther Daly, it is on the spec, so they could ask you it. You need to remember that you are nowhere near going to get all of their argument, and otherwise you'll drown again in content. Evaluation is your key. Evaluation is what gets you the marks. Single and double limited election. I'm not sure what single and double. I've not used those terms. Principal Julie testimony, absolutely. Talk about the Richard Swinburne's ideas. Brilliant. So what could you say if Christianity is sexist? That's your gender and society, gender and theology. So it's the idea of, do they treat men differently to women? Do they treat women in a worse way historically in modern day? So you need to go over your gender theology, gender society, because there's a lot you could discuss for that one, but it's about personal preference as to how you want to argue it. Yeah, so if you get a pluralism question, you can talk about society and theology. Again, if the question is very open, it should be you'll be able to bring in whatever works for you. If it's quite specific, it'll be obvious. So if it asks for exclusivism, I would stick with exclusivism. If it asks for pluralism, I would stick with pluralism and theology. So if the question though is very open about conversion, for example, should we have a mission to convert those that aren't Christians? That's in both pluralism society and pluralism theology. So you could talk about both. So it'll be quite clear from the questions. But if in doubt, put it in this essay. You will not be. Philosophy, you have to be quite strict with what you can add in and the overlaps. Ethics, you've got to get your application technique right. With DCT, bring it all in. Just make it clear as to how it's relevant to what you're trying to argue and how it's relevant to the question. Gender and theology would be Daly or Ruther. So they might ask Daly or Ruther, or whether it should be reformed, because that's Ruther, or whether it should be Christianity should be got rid of, because that's Daly. Gender and society is just about Ephesians, the roles of women, women in family life, whether it's outdated, whether secular views, etc. So, but if you did talk about Mary Daly and Ruther in that, that would be fine. If it asks for political liberator, I think it'd be quite. There's about 3 slides on my PowerPoint for political liberator. Maybe not even that. Might be just 2 slides. I'd be very hard. I would find it very hard to write a whole essay just on that. I would talk about his other roles and then whether he was just a political liberator and what the connotations of that would be, or whether he was a teacher, whether he was a man of wisdom, whether he was a religious liberator, etc. So I'd bring in other parts as well to that. If it asks a specific question on Daly, I would stick with Daly. Daly is monstrously big. The topic is huge, so I wouldn't even bring in Ruther unless you're really struggling for evaluation. But pretty much Daly is the one that you can just argue with because she really does say some quite outrageous things, which is great for discussion. So you don't have to bring in Ruther. If you did, great, but it's Daly. I'd give them Daly. New Earth theology. Don't I haven't gone into that one, so I don't know what you're referencing there. Question on whether Christianity is distinctive. I'm not sure on the spec where that comes in. So maybe just give me a bit more specifics on that one. Bonhoeffer's all been asked before. So Bonhoeffer and discipleship, I think, was the only area that's not been asked before. But if you get a question on Bonhoeffer, you still talk about all the different elements. So he has 4 main elements: grace, discipleship, etc. So you would still link them all because they're all part of the same argument. But you would say how you have to do your discipleship with costly grace, you have to do your discipleship with obedience, etc. For the more modern topics, use census data. I do recommend it because if you want to say that the UK is secular, how do you know? Give me a statistic. Give me some evidence to say, or that Christianity is dying out in. Don't say that Christianity is dying out. It's only dying out in England. It's not dying out in other countries. Christianity is still the biggest world religion. So if you want to say though that it's becoming more secular in this country or Christianity is on the decline, fine, prove it, back it up. So I definitely say use census statistics and materials for that, just because it makes your argument more convincing. If you're making a statement, an accusation like Christianity is on the decline, back it up with something. So yeah, I would definitely say if you can use statistics, do. Yes, this is a really good question. Thank you, William, for that one. I've had a lot of questions about things like salvation and election. Election, limited and unlimited election is found in both pluralism and death and afterlife. Bring them together. So when I teach death and afterlife to my students, I do a little bit of limited election in there and quite a bit of detail because I think it's going to come in later on next year anyway. So that goes very much together. Does that where you've covered it? So it's the same argument. You might have done a little bit of heaven and hell in other topics, things like that. Bring it all in. The examiners want you to represent a holistic view, which means you're at the end of your course, you're at the end of 2 years. They want to see that you're a proper philosophy student now, a religious studies student. So give them a holistic understanding. Don't think, oh, it's not in that topic, I can't use it. No, use it, bring it in, definitely. So there is a lot of overlap with them. How else could you compare Ruther and Daly? Well, just the simple arguments that they have. So how Ruther focuses on idea of warrior messiah versus the servant king, and how Daly just says that Jesus is the ultimate, attacker of women. So you just literally say how different their arguments are. Yeah, brilliant, Alex. Yeah, the sheep and the goats is the idea of what happens if judgment is the end of time. What happens to everybody in between? Where do they go? Is there a purgatory then? Is there a just no time at all? So again, that would make really good discussion. But the sheep and the goats is a really I love the sheep and the goats. I think the sheep and the goats is a great argument because at the end of the day, it's black and white. You're either a sheep or you're a goat. There is no grey area. But as well, Jesus never mentions about you being a Christian. He never mentions about you only a sheep if you follow what I'm saying. He never ever says that. He says he looks at the merits of what you have done. Are you a good person and have you done good acts? Or have you just gone through life looking after yourself that you've not done anything particularly bad? You're not a murderer, but you've never done anything good either, then you're a goat. And so that's a really nice distinction, especially for pluralism, in that obviously exclusivism and inclusivism does talk about you needing to be a Christian. That's not what the sheep and the goats imply. So you get a really nice bit of, synoptic discussion there. How do you do a whole essay on the unholy trinity? You would still bring in all the other areas, but I think if I remember rightly, the unholy trinity, I've still got about 8 PowerPoint slides covering all of that with all the examples used. So don't forget, you have to discuss each of them in depth, evaluate whether they work or won't work. That would make for quite a healthy sized essay in 40 minutes. Yeah, Bonhoeffer, sheep and goats to Bonhoeffer, that would be really good. How many scholars? Again, scholars, as many scholarly names as you can bring in, but don't forget, don't name dump. Don't just dump a name in. Oh, put a bit of Rainer in here and C.S. Lewis here and Pope Francis here. That is not going to get you the good marks. You have to say why their argument works or doesn't work. So why is Pope Francis's point relevant or not relevant? Why is Rainer's argument of value or not? So don't name dump. Make sure that you actually go through the names evaluatively and say whether they work or don't work. Yeah, I would talk about the UK for secularism, but you can also talk about other countries. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. How, again, we only look at it from our perspective within the UK, but if you look at Christianity on a whole, that would make a very nice discussion, definitely. All right, Christian moral principles, Christian ethics distinctive. Thank you, Emma. Christian, is it distinctive? I think this is the one that had a number of questions asked about so far. It's the idea of, does Christianity bring anything new, or are they just general human values? I think that's the one that links into the idea of spiritual values versus human values. Basically, it means, is Christianity special? Is it distinctive? Does it give us deep spiritual values, or is it just human values? At the end of the day, agape, for example, this is why you discuss agape. Agape, you could follow if you're a Christian with the Jesus's inspirations, but you can also follow agape if you aren't a Christian. So is agape really just a human value and therefore not distinct from Christianity, or does Christianity help it? Hence the discussion that you would have. So yeah, thank you for clarifying that one, Emma. How many marks is AO 116? 24 for AO 2. Do they mark more leniently on this paper? No, they mark them pretty much equally. They just allow for a lot more freedom with this one and freedom of discussion. But no, they mark them all pretty much the same. It just depends on the question and how students do, because it's all depends on your performance as to how they mark it. That if they ask a hard question that students really don't they struggle with, they're more like years ago. Again, it's not for DCT, but years ago they asked a cosmological question that students very rarely did, and literally using a key term, they did extremely well because they found it hard. Whereas nowadays, you guys would have been fine with a cosmological question. So it purely depends how the cohort of students respond to the questions as to how they'll mark it. But pretty much, if it's relevant, if it's argued, if it's into the question, they will give you the marks for it. Yes, discipleship, talk about cheap and costly grace, definitely, because it's your discipleship to follow costly grace and not cheap grace. So absolutely overlap them, definitely. No, the paper won't have a lower grade boundary. No, I very, very rarely is it a lower grade boundary. Is it easy to get an A star on this paper? No, not necessarily. Again, it's all that they're all quite the same. It depends how students again respond to it. It's how you guys do as to how the marks are decided. Rather, they don't plan these beforehand. It's purely based on once they've marked it, they then work it out. Um, Transformation and perfection of whole of creation. Marla, check the video because I've already responded to that in one of the comments and explained that in quite a bit of detail in one of the comments. If you can't find it later, just send me another message and I'll respond to that one. But I've just answered that one before the stream, the transformation and perfection one. Just waffle A or two, fine. Just argue something. Just argue. Just argue. This one you can just argue. Yeah, definitely. How can you counter Bonhoeffer? The idea that his ideas worked for him. His ideas worked for him against the Nazis. If we behaved like he behaved now, we'd potentially be in serious trouble. Bonhoeffer, at the end of the day, could be classed as a terrorist. He went against the law. He broke the law of the land. We agree with what Bonhoeffer did because we recognize that what the Nazis were doing to the Jewish community in Germany was wrong. So what Bonhoeffer did was right. Sorry, my screen is so dark. I think there's another thunderstorm coming. I wonder if I turn my... Is it gonna respond and light up? No, sorry. So it's the ideas that if we behaved like that nowadays, though, if somebody broke the law to do what they believed was right, then you start to come across as a terrorist. So it's the ideas of could Bonhoeffer's teachings actually work today? Can people give up their whole lives and sacrifice everything in just the pursuit of Jesus? It's extremely hardcore view. So you could just discuss whether it worked for him, but is it applicable to today? What parts can you take for our own teachings? Is it doable today? That would work as discussion of Bonhoeffer. Yes, fabulous. Bonhoeffer to Ukraine war. If you can link in anything current that is happening, fabulous. So again, have a look on the BBC News. See if there's something that you can talk about. So the Ukraine war is a very, very good example to talk about. So definitely. Oh yes, the parable of the blind man and the elephant is an excellent one. Even though it's not in the Bible, it's very, very good. As is the Copernican revolution, the idea of how everyone used to rotate around Christianity, but actually Christianity is at the center of the universe, just like Earth wasn't the center of the universe. So neither of them in the Bible, but very, very good for discussion. So definitely. Does the Bible reference matter? If you can't remember actual reference, no, just put in the quote, put in the gist of it. It's absolutely fine. But most of the time, if it's New Testament, it'll be in Matthew. So, for example, sheep and the goats, Matthew. Golden rule, Matthew. Beatitudes, Matthew. Everything tends to be in Matthew somewhere. But no, if you can't remember the reference, do not worry. What's great question, Beth? What's topics do students usually find the hardest to answer? Liberation theology. Students do not do well with liberation theology. Gender questions, students generally love but don't do very well. Why? Because you go on some either massive rant about gender and society and something, and go completely off the actual specification materials, or you drown your examiner in content and they want an argument. So avoid, if it's a topic like gender and theology or gender and society, make sure you actually talk about some of the things mentioned on the PowerPoint, the textbook, or what your teachers have covered with you. Make sure you don't drown your examiner in content. You need to have an argument and discussion. Which other ones? The more bland ones like moral principles, natural and revealed, students find really tricky because they're just really dull. So it's quite hard to remember. If you've got a specific question on faith, which is mentioned in natural and revealed, that's really tough. There's about half a PowerPoint slide that rings down what faith and the Holy Spirit does. It gives you the right words. It gives you the confidence to join the community. And it's just quite dull. So students do find that hard. And so I'd say on the whole, students find DCT the trickiest, but you were therefore allowed a lot more freedom with your discussion. Yeah, Tom, I agree. Act 17. Now, I always thought Act 17 was on the specification until a student asked me. And actually it's not on the spec. So I don't know why I ever thought that Act 17 was a really important part of it. It was just in the actual added reading. But basically, Act 17 was where St. Paul, the babbler, thought, oh, I'm going to go to Athens and tell them that they're worshipping wrong, just because that's what he did. And so he went to Greece, he went to Athens with all of the people like Plato. Obviously, it wasn't the right same time, but the same academic people, and said basically, you're worshipping wrong, you're worshipping false idols, you're worshipping side temples, you're doing it wrong. You need, so that's the revelation, that's the revealed theology, that you're worshipping in the wrong way, and that instead you should look to nature outside, you should look to God, which is more finding God through natural theology. And so that's how Acts 17 links in, basically him telling them that they're worshipping wrong and that they're doing it inside man-made temples, and they should find God within other things like nature. So that's Acts 17. It's not essential though if you don't remember it. It's just something to plump out an essay if you need to. Yes, you can still get high marks if you don't use contemporary examples. That's absolutely fine. This is all just ideas to how to plump your essay up. If you don't use statistics, it's not going to knock you down. If you don't use quotes, it's not going to knock you down. But you have to give something of substance. Basically, this is a very easy one to mark really for an examiner. When you've marked enough times, you can basically tell the students that have revised versus the students that haven't. The students that just go in there and just waffle something. Waffle is really obvious to an examiner. And so if all you can do is waffle, fine. You'll still probably get yourself, a C grade, even just with waffle. But in order to get the B's, the A's, the A stars, you have to show that you've actually learned the content, that you know the names, you know the arguments, and that makes it easier when you know the statistics, the quotes, the names, etc. Even we don't know the grade boundaries, they change every year. Yeah, 2 to 3 philosophers, that's fine, because there's normally, like for inclusivism, there's like one main name. Exclusivism, there's a couple of names. So it's, and don't forget as well, Aquinas has been haunting us all for the last 2 years. You know Aquinas now. You know Aquinas theological. You know Aquinas natural law. Bring in Aquinas. You know Augustine. Saint Augustine is there. You know Saint Augustine from Problem of Evil. You know Saint Augustine from, with his mother Monica, and the fact that was quite, he enjoyed the student life, and then his mother said, no, you must behave now, and then he said, right, no sex for anybody. You know these people now, you've studied them for 2 years. Just bring them all in, so you know the names. So even if you only think, oh, I know 2 or 3 philosophers, you actually know an awful lot more than you think. How likely is it secularism? I think secularism may have been on last year. You'll have to check the PowerPoint again for the gaps, but I think one of the key men, I can't remember if it's Dawkins or Freud, one of them's not been asked before, so it could be on that. Oh, the eye of knowledge, the eye of flesh. Is that Bonaventura or Polkinghorne? I think it's Bonaventura that says the eye of flesh. Yeah, and then Polkinghorne says something similar. So they're who you wanted to look into. Matrix sounds good. Yeah, the Matrix is deeply philosophical, so you could talk about. Yeah, no, you will. The OCR examiners are extremely generous as far as they will never ever knock you down marks for something that isn't quite right, something that's not quite relevant. They'll always want to positively mark you, but obviously the things that I always emphasize are you have to answer the question, because at the top end of the mark scheme it says that you've answered the question throughout, that you've precisely answered it. So if you've got something in your answer that isn't really relevant or isn't clear why it's relevant. So if you get a question on daily and you stick a paragraph in about Ruth there, your grade just goes down. So it's not that they're negatively marking, it's because you've not precisely answered the question. So, but if you get a name wrong or something like that, they won't go, oh, there's no reference, knock them down. No, they give you positive marks for everything you put that's relevant. No, you don't need chapter quote. No, just remember the quote, the Bible passage. That would be brilliant. Yes, Charlie, unfortunately, yeah, with ethics, you are correct. They did repeat two of the questions. They could do it again this year. I really flipping hope they don't, though. I might be sending an angry email if they do. Yeah, that's it. Polkinghorns, the binoculars. I think pluralism is going to come up in some way, whether it's theology or society. Yes. Oh, thank you very much, Evie. No, again, they don't mark this one. Well, it's not that they mark it more leniently, it's the fact that more. So, for example, for teleological, you need to talk about Paley, Aquinas, and Hume, for example. Whereas in this topic, you can talk and bring in lots of different things. So it's not that they're more lenient, it's the fact that there's more freedom for discussion within these. They want you to represent a more holistic. So it's not that they're being lenient, it's the fact that they will accept far more in your answers and get very good marks for them. Bonaventura was just somebody that talked about having philosophically, kind of as a metaphor, having different eyes, an eye of flesh, and so like the eye of science, the eye of an eye for math, and then an eye for faith. And Polkinghorne talks about binoculars, so the idea that if you close one eye off to science, you've only got tunnel vision. If you close your eye off for faith, then you've got tunnel vision. So you need both eyes, both faith and science to work together. So do not worry if you don't come across Bonaventura or Polkinghorne before. It's not on, it's a little name on one slide, so don't worry about it. Yes, that's absolutely fine. So just put the quotes in. If you can remember the passage, pop it afterwards, pop it before. If you can't remember the passage, that's not a problem. How many pages is normally for one essay? I'd say about 3 sides, give or take, handwriting, speed, size of handwriting, things like that. Oh yeah, Plato's forms, definitely. You could bring in Aristotle and his empirical views. You could bring in Plato and how he uses his reason. Definitely. Yeah, no, absolutely. Don't know if I've come across Bonaventura in liberation theology, but it doesn't. I don't know how many I doubt there's another Bonaventura, so I would say it's the same person. Yes, so if you are talking about the fall, definitely talk about the problem of evil, that would work. And Jonah's parable, yes, absolutely lovely. So that would really work very nice. Just again, and make sure you link it back to how it's working towards your argument. Don't overdo the content and link it back to the question. Really good question, Lucy. If you mention an analogy, you have to explain it or just name it. A bit of both. You can't just say this links to the elephant and the blind man. What does that mean? You can't just say, as shown in the sheep and the goats. What does that mean? You would have to do a little bit of explanation and then evaluate it more. So even just a couple of sentences. So I would say you can't drop in the name of something. You would have to briefly explain it. Bringing in synoptic links count towards evaluation. No, it counts more towards your AO1, your content. But again, as if you bring in something, so for example, Irenaeus, the idea that was being tested, if that's what's relevant, and you're bringing that in, then you say Irenaeus's argument, however, does not work. You get both whammies. You get AO1 for Irenaeus, you then get AO2 for evaluating him. So always evaluate every name you use, and that then means you get both AO1 and AO2 marks. Depends on the question in liberation theology, whether you should compare them or do them in some practice. It purely depends on what the question is for that one. Do I think death and afterlife may come up? Yes, it might be on an election one, and then they'll get a little bit of pluralism in there as well. That's a really good question, Beth. You don't necessarily get marks for talking about Augustine's history, but it certainly helps you to, when you're talking about the views that he has, as to where those views have then come from. So the idea, you can use it to evaluate, to say how Augustine didn't always have these views, or wasn't always like this towards women, or how the ideas of, he used to think post pre-fall, he thought, Adam and Eve were quite happy, they were open sexually, there was no pressure or disgrace on them. And so you could use some of Augustine's history to say, like Augustine says about stealing the pear or whatever. We don't even know if that's even a true story, but how therefore everyone's sinful because he stole a pear even though he wasn't hungry. Oh, wow, big deal. But so you can talk about his history, but I wouldn't do a massive paragraph on it. I'd just bring it in to discuss how he turned into the Augustine he turned into. If it's a question on salvation, it'll be clear if it's death and afterlife or pluralism. Death and afterlife, it's going to say heaven, hell, or purgatory. If it says something on election or salvation, so if it says the word heaven, death and afterlife. If it says salvation or election, could be either. And again, you could talk about either and it's completely relevant. Yes, so limited election. Thank you, John. Limited election means that even if you're a perfectly good Christian, you still might not get into heaven because it's limited even to Christians. I think Calvin says the similar thing as well, that it isn't just a, golden ticket, I'm a Christian, woo, go me. No, it might be that actually you don't get into heaven, which it kind of goes with the sheep and the goats. But if you're a good Christian and you're a good active Christian, then you would assume you are more the sheep in judgment. So yeah, but that's what limited election is. If moral principles comes up, it is important to know the three different approaches, definitely. So knowing how Catholics, Protestants, and Church of England or Anglican do differ in their approaches to tradition, etc. It's very dry, it's very dull. To know all the different key words and key names, but certainly it could be a question. So moral principles. I doubt they ask a moral principles and natural and revealed because they're both so similar, but you could again overlap them. If as well you answer a question and some of the arguments in one of your answers could be used in another essay, fine, you can repeat the same arguments twice. So if you get a pluralism and you get a moral principles and you want to use the elephant analogy twice, fine, you are marked within the essay. The examiner doesn't think, oh, they've already used that. No, they have to mark the essay on its own. Yeah, argumentative will get you a long way. So even if you don't remember a lot of AO1, arguing something and just dropping in a name that you remember, even if it's not specific in that area, but it's relevant, make it relevant, then yes, but argument will get you a long way. I don't know what was on AS this year. I don't generally tend to look because often when they write the exam papers, they don't often correlate necessarily. So even if it's on an AS paper, doesn't mean it won't be on an A2 paper. So I don't know what was asked in the first year though. Do I think Augustine may come up? Yes. He doesn't seem to have really shown his face that much in the second year. So I think Augustine might come up. The obvious question that I would, if it was me, I would ask something on the pessimistic optimistic. The idea is the arguments too pessimistic or are they optimistic? That means you could then talk about his whole theory, but it might ask you pre-post fall. It might ask you about things that have been asked in the past. So Augustine is a possibility. No, we don't get the essays back after the exams. We would have to pay for them. So if we after on results day, if we wanted your papers back, we'd have to pay for them, or the students would have to pay for them. So no, we don't get the essays back. We never see your answers. American politics, no, that sounds very, very interesting. And what's happening in the Supreme Court, definitely. Especially, but again, if you're doing something like that, keep it brief and make sure you make it really relevant to the question and your argument. But absolutely, bring in what's happening in America if you can make it relevant. Absolutely. Pessimistic versus optimistic, you could mention it's the Odyssey, but again, because it's synoptic, do it briefly. Don't just do a problem of evil essay. They still want you to show that it's a separate essay and that you have separate knowledge of the DCT areas, but you can definitely bring in his Theodicy. Absolutely. He's the same guy, so it's the same argument. So, yes, you can bring that in. Yeah, fabulous. If you get is heaven a physical place, you could get is heaven a physical place, is purgatory a physical place, is hell a physical place. So you could get a physical place for any of them. You could just compare different biblical teachings. You could also talk about the philosophical issues of idea of physical. So if it's physical, what's physical? Like, am I brought out of my coffin, zombie-like? Or am I given is my body still in the coffin? Am I given a new transformed body? But if I'm given a transformed body in heaven or hell, is that still the same me, personal identity? If God also transformed me, am I still the same person? If heaven is physical and therefore you are physical, or is just heaven physical and you're just still a spirit? Are you still spiritual soul? Are you essence? But if you are physical, are you still the same physical person you were? So, for example, if you are, are blind or deaf or have an issue during life, is that the person that's then in the afterlife? So you've got to live eternity blind, or are you then transformed in an afterlife physically, but are you still then the same person? So that's what you would discuss in an essay like that. Yeah, you can use synoptic links, definitely, Rachel. I do think you still need to show the examiners you have learned DCT. Well, certainly if you want high grades, you want BAs and A stars, you have to show you've actually learned the DCT and that you know the content and you know the topics. I'm talking about low C grades for students that just kind of do a lot of synoptic links and things like that, you have to still show that you've learned the areas, and the more you can represent that you know the DCT and use it within that context and evaluate it, then you will do better. But certainly, if you do a lot of synoptic links that are relevant, you will still do well. Arguments in favour of religious schools, well, they're self-funded, so they're not funded by the government. And the idea is that often they have extremely good results and that they're often quite small as well, a religious schools. So therefore, it creates more of a Christian ethos or an Islamic ethos or whatever it might be, whichever religious school you go to, that it's also they make it quite clear we are a Christian school. So if you don't want your child to go to a Christian school, don't send them. But what happens if you are a Muslim, if you are a Christian and you want your children to go to that school, they should be able to pick which school they want to go to. We shouldn't have schools taken away or the opportunity taken away. And yes, they will learn about the Bible and they will learn these things. But actually, school is hard, full stop. And I don't think whether you go to a Christian school or whether you go to a secular school, it makes much difference. Obviously, they can more bespoke what they learn though, so they might not learn maybe everything that maybe other students, but they still have to follow a national curriculum. They still have to learn the core basis. So you would weigh up the strengths and weaknesses there, but obviously Dawkins would say it's indoctrination, blah blah blah, but it's the idea that actually you can say I don't want to go to mass. You can sign out, certainly at secondary school, or it's the ideas that I always say to my students, well, do you think Dawkins, if his son or daughters you came home from school and said, actually, I think I'm be a Christian, do you think he'd be open-minded to that? Probably not. So he's just as indoctrinating. So it's the idea that there's a lot of swings and roundabouts with religious schools, but that's again the beauty of an essay on that. Yeah, absolutely fine. You don't have to remember the book, Zoe. So if you just remember the person, not the book, fine. Yeah, death and afterlife, there's a lot of overlap. So death and afterlife is heaven, hell, purgatory. Pluralism is inclusivism, exclusivism, but they still are who's exclusive to who's going to heaven and hell. So yeah, the overlaps are very clear, are very much there. How well developed does your evaluation need to be? Depends on how high a mark you want. You need to do the table tennis, go backwards and forwards, put an argument, defend it, counter defend, go backward. The more in-depth evaluation, the deeper that you go, the more questions you ask. Don't ask too many rhetorical questions though, but that gets you higher marks. That's what they want. They don't forget, most of the examiners are teachers. Most of the examiners have actually taught all of this. They don't want to read regurgitated PowerPoint content. They want to actually read something different. They want to read an argument, a discussion that you have had with the materials you've been given. Probability of knowledge of God's existence. They like asking it. Unfortunately, they do like asking knowledge, naturally revealed knowledge of God. Is there an argument for purgatory being physical? I don't. Again, I think it will be more the discussion that you would have as to whether an idea of, just like what I've said for heaven, whether would a physical purgatory work or not. I don't know if there's anybody that actually talks about it, because Protestants, for example, don't agree with purgatory, but John Hick mentions purgatory. But there's a lot of, certainly your oldies, your traditionals, Irenaeus did not believe in purgatory. Purgatory is a bit more of a modern thing, in that the idea of, like Jesus, sheep and the goats, there was no purgatory there. There was no, oh, you're a donkey. You're going to go to purgatory. There was none of that. You were a sheep or you were a goat. So it's the idea that purgatory seems more of a modern day adaptation to soften the blow that maybe you go somewhere for a bit of cleansing. So like John Hick's unlimited election, not a popular view that everyone will be saved. Well, what's the point then? If everyone's going to be saved, but some through purgatory, who wants to be in heaven with Hitler? So it's the idea that a lot of these views aren't popular, but your job is to discuss the different views. How would you flesh out question on Jesus, Son of God? The ideas of, is he divine or was he just human? And then you discuss about miracles. Do miracles show he's divine? But if he's divine, can he really die painfully on a cross? Can you kill God? But then how much was he human? How much did he know? Did he know he was the Son of God? Did he, was he just a man of great spiritual guidance? So again, that's, you would discuss divine versus human. Right, folks, last few minutes. So I'll try and, sorry if I've missed your questions. Again, pop your questions on the PowerPoints and I'll reply the videos and I'll reply later on, but I'll try and do a few last. Jesus thought it was divine. It's more the fact of Jesus's acts could show he was divine, like miracles. The fact that he granted miracles, and then you've got like the C.S. Lewis quote, the idea if Jesus was just a moral teacher, but he made out he could do miracles and things, then actually he's more of a lunatic. That he had to have actually had some divine. Or John Hick talks about how Jesus had to be an incarnation. He had to be God in order to be different from. Abraham, Moses, he had to be unique in that sense. That's a really good one, Brian. Would you bring in secular ethical theories with Christian moral principles, utilitarianism, and Kant? First of all, they're not necessarily secular. Kant, the postulates, for example, summum bonum, that was heaven. Summum bonum and the ideas of immortal soul, and that's not necessarily secular. And utilitarianism, John Stuart Mill, for example, his principle of utility was to do with happiness and the happiness of others, which was very much linked with the golden rule. So I know you're just loosely throwing it out there as secular. Just be careful who you class as secular, though. Just in an essay, I don't want you to make a mistake. But absolutely, if you see, like, if I was talking about Bonhoeffer and duty, I'd be bringing Kant all over that. I'd be talking about Kant and his views of duty, and does that work with Bonhoeffer, and which views are better, and are they both useful? Are they too abstract? So, absolutely, if you want to bring in different views, moral principles, utilitarianism, absolutely, as long as you make it relevant. So no, that would work well. Liberation theology has done a lot. Has it made significant impact? No, because the areas they help Latin America is immensely problematic politically, financially. Liberation theology can only do so much because actually a lot of the issues and completely out of their reach. Does that then mean they should just sit back and go, "Oh, we're good Christians, give to charity, but we're not going to do anything"? No, at least they try. So that's the huge benefit of liberation theology is the orthopraxis over the orthodoxy. So much of the time, many Christians are just all about the orthodoxy. That means read the Bible, be a good Christian. They don't practice what they preach. Whereas liberation theology is about orthopraxy, orthopraxis, this idea of practicing what they're preaching. So yes, they might not have been fully successful. They certainly have tried. But even just a quick Google afterwards, how successful or what are the successes of liberation theology? That would be really nice in their say. Everything. So, cost of discipleship is leaving behind the person you were, both physically, possessions wise, but also mentally the person that you were. That you need to basically, it's like discipleship is like becoming a nun. You sign yourself to Christ. So it's kind of like that way in that you give up everything in order to just follow Christ. Structure of globalization and multi faith societies. Not sure, Emma. I would have to see the specific question for that one. Nashita, what a fabulously worded question. Um, what's a good counter argument for Mary Daly's pessimism of the fall being a catalyst for the phallocratic society? Bible needs reinterpreted seems weak. A counter argument for that. I don't know if the Bible being reinterpreted is weak though, because at the end of the day, the Bible was written by men. So it's the idea that it's their interpretation, but also the way that I see it anyway is the men writing the Bible were already in a patriarchal phallocratic society. So it was already the society that existed that then influenced the way they wrote the Bible. So the Bible itself is more of a byproduct of it rather than a catalyst for it. So that's how I would argue against Mary Daly, is the kind of the chicken and the egg argument. Mary Daly argues that Christianity is the reason why we are solely patriarchal, and it's the catalyst for that. They were way patriarchal before the writing of the Bible. The society was patriarchal long before Jesus, for example. Jesus wasn't the leader of the patriarchy. The patriarchy already existed. They already had the male ruling emperors and things. So these ideas of the pagan views of kind of women and strong women and things, they were still predominantly patriarchy. So I would maybe discuss it in that way. But very good question. Very, very good question. Yeah, the idea of liberation theology using Marxism makes it political. Yes, that would work nicely, John. And it's the idea of, is there anything wrong with religion and politics, though? Is there anything wrong with liberation taking a political stance when it's a political problem that's causing the issues in the first place, or in quite certainly in Latin America? Or the idea is that actually liberation theology makes it very clear we are just taking from Marxism the idea that there is a problem with money and poverty, and we are the cause of it, and therefore we can stop it. That's all they take from Marxism. Is there anything wrong with that? So that's what you would discuss. Oh, thanks very much. I just hope you all do really well tomorrow and you can finally not have to listen to me or my videos anymore or my silly little jokes that at least I laugh at myself. So hopefully you laugh along sometimes, but most of the time I just say the jokes just to entertain myself while doing the videos. You're very welcome. Oh, I like that. So, is it acceptable to argue that interfaith dialogue can be a publicity stunt? I don't know, but it's a clever spin. Could you do it as a no? Because interfaith dialogue was something that they kept within for themselves. Things like scriptural reasoning movement, they just wanted to have the discussions to interest them, and then other people was like, "Oh, I want to join. I want to join." So it was never really. I wouldn't really say it's a publicity stunt. Sometimes what people do to show interfaith dialogue would be a publicity stunt, definitely. Oh, look at us, look at us. We have a Christian and a Muslim. Look at us. Sometimes it would be, but quite often I think that the actual core of interfaith dialogue or genuine interfaith dialogue, like scriptural reasoning movement, is not a publicity stunt. No, maybe things like the Dabru Emmet could maybe spin it. At the end of the day, you could maybe say, is it a little bit too late to, we had to wait for the Jews to actually have this conversation with Christians in order to create this bond between them again? What should really Christians have maybe gone to Jews after the Holocaust, etc.? Was it just you know what I mean? So, no, it's a very interesting spin on it. So I would definitely discuss it, but I don't know whether it would be. Yeah, I don't know whether you could definitely argue it, but you would have to be careful how you would look at it. So I'd look at genuine verses and give something to back it up as well. So give something to back it up. You're very welcome, everyone. Oh, migration, thank you. Migration leads to multi-faith societies. Yes, A-level geography. Um, it's mainly this idea of the reason why we get multiple faiths is because people move, and the idea that because of, like you said, globalization before, the idea that we have so many conversations with people all over the world and people from all over the world move here and we go on holidays, that we've become far more multicultural or multi-religious, and so it's the idea of, then does Christianity lose its core? Hence why knowing the statistics of Christianity going down would help. But the idea that we are not becoming secular, by no means is this country becoming secular. We're just becoming maybe less Christian, but we have many, many strong religions within this country as well. So yeah, even but if you know some statistics from geography, bring them in, definitely. You are very welcome, everyone. Very, very welcome. I'm really pleased I've been able to help people. Dabra Emmet is a key document in pluralism and society. So just double check. It's about the second or third slide in. Ford, something Ford. He mentions there's two main documents. I'll never forgive OCR for making this exam so late. Well, in their defense, I don't work for OCR, so I don't need to defend them, but in their defense, we're no later than we are normally in previous years. What they did was they wanted to extend the exam period so students didn't have exams all at the same time, but students still had exams on the same day. So they kind of spread it out, left us at the end like we've always have been, but then made psychology and geography and everything else so much earlier than it normally is. So the extension has been quite excessive. So it was the idea that all the exam boards said they want to extend the period to avoid students having multiple exams on the same day. They didn't do a very good job, I have to say. Ah, thank you, Emma. You still have two exams. Oh gosh, Georgia, I wonder what your other exam is. I thought we were the last. Yep, chemistry, yep, the many overlaps, many overlaps. Four exams, yeah, that's just cruel. So yeah, that's why we are hanging on till the bitter end, because it was meant to avoid that, and they've just, yeah, not done a very good job. Any final questions? Anything final that I can, otherwise just comment on that. I'm hungry now, it's tea time. So any other final questions I can quickly go over? Otherwise, just send me the messages on the channel and I'll respond to messages in the morning as well. I'll do my very best to, and I'll just be thinking about you all. Part of me just wants it over with now. Part of me just wants you to go and enjoy your summers and, end this chapter of your lives. But I also want you to go out on a high. I want you to, do your absolute, so just pull it from the core, pull 2 years of hard work and put it into this exam. Humanism views, that's quite a big one. That probably just needs a bit of a Google, or check the PowerPoint. Anything I think is really helpful, know your texts. Go over your Redemptoris Missio, Maleris Dignitatum, know your text, because even if they don't come up specifically, they're really good quotes that you could use. Freud's ideas of secularism are very similar to his views in religious experience. The idea is that it's an illusion that we create as a comfort blanket, and therefore, in order to progress within society, we need to leave religion behind. Scriptural reasoning is interfaith dialogue. So there is interfaith dialogue is where you have dialogue with people of multiple faiths, including atheism. Scriptural reasoning movement is specifically for the people of book, as in Jews, Christians, Muslims, who get together. They are opening up to other people, but it's the scriptural reasoning movement. So scriptural, it's about the people, religions of books, and they look at the scripture and say, what does your scripture tell you? What does your scripture tell you? As a discussion point, which means it is an interfaith dialogue, but interfaith dialogue is something separate, because this is for anyone having a talk with their neighbour who's a Muslim. That would be interfaith dialogue. Oh, I like that's really clever, Jess. The idea of the parable of the rich man and Lazarus to Bonhoeffer's ideas of suffering. Yeah, like that. That's really clever. Eva, can they ask a set text in a question? They could. They did it for Ephesians a few years ago. I don't think they'd do it again. They might ask something specific from Maleris Dignitatum, but again, it'd be quite clear. Would it be just the gospel and the number? They could just say sheep and goats and just expect you to know the sheep and the goats. They might say rich man and poor man, or rich man and Lazarus, then they would expect you to know that. So they don't. They might use a gospel and a number though, because I would think there's 2 passages. I think person of Jesus, Mark something, and another one. So they might say with reference to Mark. So yes, that's a very, very good point, Eva. Make sure that, again, they'll be on the PowerPoint. I'll have specified them. Make sure you know which, basically, I think one's resurrection and one's like the bleeding woman or something like that, or the blind man he heals for miracles. So just make sure, you know the ones that are mentioned on the spec. Oh, that's lovely. We won't know 2023 grade boundaries. We won't know them until after your exam results, and by then you won't care. So I generally don't tend to look at grade boundaries a whole lot either, because they don't really tell you much afterwards. So they won't decide the grade boundaries. Everything is marked, so we won't hear about them. No problem, everybody. Thank you very, very much. Yes, you can use rhetorical questions, and I agree with what your teacher's saying, is sometimes when students use rhetorical questions, they then do a rhetorical question, then another one, then another one, then another one. You get kind of in a rhetorical question, like cul-de-sac, where you can't stop asking them. Ask one and then do something with it. But certainly sometimes it's a good way of rounding off even an argument. So I'm not opposed to rhetorical questions, but just don't do them excessively. Thank you very much, everyone. Good luck tomorrow. I'll be thinking about you all for your final exam. You've got this. You really, really, I'm fully confident you really do have this, everyone. You just need to make sure that you link everything back to the question and argue something. And I just pray that the questions are approachable, that at least you know something that you can write about. So otherwise, I'm here in the messages if you need me. Hope your revision goes well tonight and in the morning, and let me know how it goes, everyone. Let me know how it goes. Bye for now, everyone. Thanks ever so much for joining me. Bye, everyone.